There is a small yellow packet sitting in almost every kitchen in this country, and it has convinced 2 generations of bakers that bread cannot rise without it. Look at this jar on my counter. It has been alive for 11 years. Fed on nothing but flour and water. It has never once needed that packet. And by the time I am done, you will understand exactly why my grandmother's cellar would not have had room for the other kind. Here is the number I want you to hold on to. A handful of yeast packets costs a few dollars and dies the moment you use them. What I am about to show you costs the price of a bag of flour, and once it is alive, it refuses to stop working unless you neglect it. Keep that gap in your mind. We are coming back to it, and it is bigger than it sounds. Before we go further, when you buy bread, do you ever turn the bag around and read what keeps it soft for 2 weeks on a shelf? Or do you just trust that soft means safe? I did not think to ask that question myself until years after I had left the community I grew up in. Tell me honestly in the comments, not the polite answer, the real one. My grandmother kept a crock on the windowsill above her sink, and it was never empty, not once in all the years I knew her. She fed it before the men went to the fields, and again at night, and she never bought a single packet to make it work. Flour, water, the air in that kitchen, that was the whole recipe, and it had been the whole recipe longer than anyone in the family could trace. What lived in that crock was never something she added. It was something she caught. That is the plain fact of wild yeast. Flour that has not been stripped and bleached already carries wild spores on its surface, and so does the air in an ordinary kitchen. The conclusion is simple. You do not manufacture fermentation in a factory. You invite it into a bowl. My judgment is this. A starter built this way produces a depth of flavour a single-strain packet was never designed to reach, because the packet was built for speed, not character. Where I grew up, we would not have called bread that rises in an hour and tastes like nothing bread at all. It was something else. Quicker, plainer, forgotten by the next meal. So let's build the thing itself, because a memory is not a method. Equal parts flour and non-chlorinated water, mixed in glass or ceramic, never metal, covered loosely so air can move, set where it will not be disturbed. Day 1. Nothing dramatic happens, and that is normal. You are not activating anything yet. You are extending an invitation and waiting to see who accepts it. Here is where people quit too early, and I refuse to let you be one of them. Around day 2, you may see a violent rush of bubbles and think you have already won. You have not. That is the false rise. A burst of the wrong bacteria feeding on raw flour before the organisms you actually want take hold. Discard most of it. Feed again. Keep going. Do not throw it out. Nobody puts this part in the title of their video, and it is the part that actually decides whether you succeed. Have you ever started something that looked like it was failing right before it worked? Tell me in the comments, because that false rise is exactly that moment, stretched out over flour and water. A neighbour 2 farms over kept her starter going so long that when her daughter married and moved 3 counties away, she sent a jar of it riding in the back of the buggy, wrapped in a dish towel like a passenger. That family called it simply the old one, and it fed that new household its first loaves in its first winter, in a house that did not even have curtains up yet. Try sending a commercial packet on a journey like that. It is bought fresh, used up fast, and forgotten. By design. The 5-day rhythm is where a curiosity becomes a working starter. Day 1. Mix and wait. Day 2. Discard and feed through the false rise. By day 3, in a kitchen sitting around 70 degrees, you should see a steadier rise, smaller bubbles throughout, instead of one dramatic burst. Day 4. The smell turns from something faintly unpleasant into something closer to yogurt, tangy instead of off. By day 5, a mature culture should double within 4 to 6 hours of feeding, and it should smell pleasantly sour, not sharp, not like nail polish, like something that has finally come alive on purpose. I have stood in 100 kitchens that were not mine since I left, and I have never once seen a woman reach for a starter jar the way my grandmother did. Out of instinct, not instruction. The way you flip a light switch without looking at it. That does not come from a recipe card. It comes from years of your hands knowing before your mind does. And here is where it gets more interesting, because tang is not an accident. It is chemistry. Sourness comes from lactic acid bacteria living alongside your wild yeast, and the balance between the two decides everything. Feed more often, keep it warmer, and you favour the yeast, gentler tang, faster lift. Feed less often, let it sit cooler and longer, and you favour the bacteria, deeper, sharper, the sourness people associate with heritage loaves. It is a dial, not a switch. Once you understand that, your starter stops being a mystery and starts being an instrument. If you are the kind of person who reads the side of a flour bag before deciding whether to buy it, you already know why I am spending this much time on something that looks, to most people, like a bowl of paste. You are not most people. And we have not even baked a loaf yet. The bishop's wife in our district fed hers only once every 2 days, deliberately, calling it a starter that did not spook easy in a humid summer kitchen. Fact. A starter fed on a longer, more disciplined interval builds a lower, more hostile pH faster, which suppresses mold and unwanted bacteria more effectively than one fed too often out of impatience. Conclusion. Patience is not just flavour, it is safety, built in rather than sprayed on. Judgment. Watching her jars outlast every other thing in that cellar through a bad summer. I believe that old rhythm solved a real problem long before anyone had a word like shelf-stable. Before you ever bake with it, you test it. Drop a spoonful of active starter into room temperature water. Floats, and it is ready. Light enough on trapped gas to lift real bread. Sinks, and it needs more time. That is not failure. That is information. The first time I picked up a packet of commercial yeast in an English grocery store, I stood there so long reading the ingredients that the cashier finally asked if I was lost. I was not lost. I was trying to understand why something that used to be free, alive, and simple now came wrapped in foil with an expiration date printed on it like a warning. Now the dough. Your mature starter is the entire leavening engine. No commercial yeast added, ever, in a true wild fermented loaf, combined only with flour, water, and salt. Fact. Wild leavened dough needs a longer bulk rise than commercially yeasted dough, often stretching across hours instead of one, because a smaller population of organisms is doing the same job. Conclusion. Speed is simply not part of this bargain. Judgment. That is not a flaw. It is the entire trade. Time given generously for a structure and flavour a fast rise cannot reach, because gluten needs time exactly as much as the culture does. During that long rise, you are not idle. Every 30 to 40 minutes, reach in, stretch one side up, fold it over, Turn the bowl a quarter turn, 4 folds a session. No machine required. Doesn't it feel strange that bare hands can build what an expensive mixer promises in minutes? It felt strange to me too, the first time it actually worked. At my aunt's Sunday table, not long before I left for good, she set down a loaf that had taken 2 full days from first feeding to oven. Nobody at that table thought 2 days was long to wait for bread. It was simply how long bread took, the same way a garden took a season and a hog took a year. If you are the kind of person who is still reading this instead of skipping ahead to the ending, you already know there is more coming, because this channel was built for people who wait for the whole story. When the bulk rise is finished, visibly grown, airy under your palm, holding a slight dent instead of springing back, you shape it, rest it once more, and score the top before baking. Fact: an unscored loaf still expands, but tears randomly along its weakest point, ugly and uncontrolled. Conclusion: scoring gives the expanding gas a controlled place to escape. Judgment: a scored loaf is not beautiful because someone decided rustic should look a certain way. It is beautiful because it is honest about where the pressure went. Now, I want to be fair, because it would be dishonest not to be. Wild fermentation is slower, less predictable in a kitchen with wide temperature swings, and it demands attention a packet of commercial yeast simply does not ask for. If company is arriving in 2 hours, a wild starter will not get you there, and pretending otherwise would not serve you. Commercial yeast solves a real problem of speed. I will not stand here and call that dishonest. It is a different bargain than the one I'm asking you to consider. For that shattered glass crust, you need steam in the first minutes of baking, which a home oven does not give you naturally. Bake covered inside a heavy pot for the first stretch, trapping the dough's own steam. Then uncover it so the crust can dry and darken. That trapped humidity keeps the crust flexible long enough for full expansion before it sets, which is the entire difference between a thin, crackling shell and a thick, hard one. And here is the part that matters most if you are actually going to do this rather than just watch it. A properly kept starter is, in the plainest sense, eternal. My grandmother's crock outlived 2 ovens, a barn fire next door, and 1 long illness during which a neighbour fed it for her, because nobody in that community would have let something alive die of neglect while its keeper recovered. Feed it weekly in the refrigerator if you bake rarely, daily at room temperature if you bake often, and there is no reason a jar started today should not still be rising bread a decade from now, long after every packet you might have bought instead has expired, unused, in the back of a cupboard. The larger truth underneath all of this was never really about yeast. It is the difference between buying something that expires and cultivating something that lasts. The difference between my grandmother's crock on that windowsill and a foil packet stamped with a date that assumes you will forget to use it in time. She never once had to guess whether her bread would rise. She had simply spent years learning to listen to something alive, instead of trusting a label to promise it for her. So here is your homework, and I want it in the comments, not just in your kitchen. Start your own jar this week. Flour, water, patience, nothing else. And tell me on day 3 exactly what it smells like, because that is the moment most people quit. And I want to know which one you were. That gap I asked you to hold on to at the start, between a few dollars of packets that vanish and a bag of flour that becomes something alive and lasting. You understand it now, the way my grandmother understood it. Not a saving on paper. The difference between something you keep buying and something you only ever have to catch once. The crock is still on my counter. It is still alive. And it is not going anywhere.